Oh, we've started. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Plato. You already knew that. Now you know it again. And sitting beside me is Adam Gaydosh, and he's our Director of Security Intelligence, and you already knew that. And today we're going to talk about the RSA Conference, right?
That's right.
So, and we're going to muse and talk about the trends and the ideas and the froth and the tantrums and the problems of RSA. But there were some interesting things that came out of RSA, so it's not going to be all bitterness and froth. Well, some of it will be.
I think we could cough up some positivity.
We're going to try. It's not easy. This was I don't know. It was a tough year for us. So I do want to say we'll be taking questions, and it doesn't have to be about RSA. A lot went on at RSA this year, a lot. So we will be taking your questions throughout this. So if anything pops into your head, by all means, ask us. We've got a window right up here. I can see questions, kind of, and we'll answer them. And so there you have it. So I guess with that, we will, where do you want to start, Adam? What do you want to start with first? I suppose we should get the inevitable out of the way, which is it was pretty awful.
Wasn't that bad. It's just so derivative off of previous years that it starts to be very grinding in that regard, I think, is probably what we're getting at.
Yeah, I said many times that I felt that it was extremely repetitive. You hear the same pitch over and over and over again. You go to the booths, every booth has just got another ridiculous gimmick, and it just feels so fake and so. It's always been that way, but I don't know. It just seems like it got worse. I couldn't believe it could get worse, but it did.
I think it's because there's this trend over the last couple of years where there's some new industry buzzword, and everybody tacks that on the beginning of their description of their product, no matter what it is.
Right.
So you can't tell what did we say? It's machine learning this year.
Yes, machine learning. So if you, it doesn't matter what you do. If you're a plumber, you could just put machine learning in front of it. Machine learning drain cleaning, and you are now a highly funded cybersecurity company. Yes, last year it was threat intelligence, right? Everything was threat intelligence. Everybody's talking about how, we have integrated threat intelligence, which,
What is it that you do?
Yeah, what is it that you do here? It was depressing at times. I really feel like, I guess the question I would have that sort of gets me is, well, what do we do? How do we fix that? I mean, is it fixable, or do we just let it kind of blow up? And
well, frankly, this is our opportunity to not do what was frustrating me about the conference, to be perfectly honest with you, is that what was depressing about it is there was a lot of repetition of we are failing, we are failing, we are failing.
Yeah.
And frankly, what I used to look forward to is the sessions that really focused on solutions. And I feel like maybe it is, as our industry is maturing and is attracting more capital and more attention, the focus is less on actually solving problems than inventing the next problem to have a product to try to solve. Like the drone physical security.
So there's a company, they were kind of on the far reaches of the expo. They had a funny name, and I'm trying to remember. It was like Drone Dion or Dren Dion or something like that. And so they made a product that it basically was a drone physical security. So it would
it was a drone jammer, basically.
Drone jammer, yeah, there you go. And so you could like put these things around your building, and if a drone came into that space, it would
alert. It was kind of like wireless IPS, but for drones.
Right.
So it would detect and alert you that there's a drone in your physical presence, and then you could send, instead of a deauth for Wi-Fi, you could send a
killer drone?
Yeah, I don't know, something that would basically
a hunter killer?
deactivate or DOS the drone and get it to drop or lose its signal or whatever.
Which all things being equal, that was probably one of the better ones. At least was kind of cool.
It's kind of cool, but you know, we even were laughing, and the person came up. She's like, "That's not the truth," but she was giggling, so she knew it was. But we said something to the fact of you're inventing a threat so you could market a solution to it, when in reality, that might be a bigger issue in the future. And yes, in theory, it could be an issue today, but functionally, how many people attending that conference have a problem with physical security espionage via drone? Probably not that many.
Probably, yes. It's a good example of there are probably a few companies that's something to think about, but those are like so few and far between, and everybody else is, yeah, I mean, it's just become sort of eye candy at that point, you know. So yeah, the drone one was interesting.
And what'll be their liability when Amazon starts doing the drone delivery? You can just set that up in your neighborhood and just start harvesting Xboxes every time.
Hey, that's actually not a bad idea. You know, you could follow the Amazon drones around, and you could shoot them down and get the contents, and then
just let the drone go off.
Or you could use it to oh man, we're thinking of all sorts of horrible things here. Anyways,
but I think that underscores that some of the stuff gets pretty ridiculous there, and that's what could be, at least to me, a little bit depressing about, as an industry, to your point of what can we do about it. There's less focus on what are the real world issues that most of our clients and enterprises today are actually facing, and more on the fantastic or the sensationalistic, or just the straight up complaining that we're failing.
Right. You know, there's a great line from the Innovation Sandbox, which we'll get to the Sandbox in a minute, because I think that was, I don't know, we often find the Sandbox is the highlight of RSA. It's like, it
was for me, for sure.
It's always the best part of the show. But there's, in the beginning of the Sandbox, they always bring these VCs up on stage, and they sit up there and they talk about themselves and their vineyards they own and the jets they fly around in. And, you know, the rest of us, you know,
so the one guy kept referring to us, he kept referring to everyone as mere mortals.
Yes.
Oh, come on, buddy.
Yeah, he couldn't have been more, you know, sort of condescending to the audience. Well, you mere mortals and your sub-millionaire lifestyles, you know. But he did say one good thing. Admittedly, it may be the only smart thing he's ever said, you know, after he invested in Splunk or somebody. But whatever. He said, you can't defend against stupid. And that actually became the title of my my first blog, the blog about the. I thought that was just I felt like that set the tone for the rest of the show. It was like, you can't defend against stupid, which is.
It's got a lot more cachet than, you know, people are always the weakest link or something to that effect, which is true.
Right.
But that has more punch. I like it.
Yes. But the more I thought about that, I thought that's a weakness. I mean, we know from our experience in the industry and everything we do, and that at a certain point, you kind of get where it's like you get to that layer of stupid, and there's nothing you can really do inside that. You really can't defend against stupid and lazy and and just bad habits. Those are things that just sort of naturally exist. And so how do you then deal with them? And I'm not really sure any of the solutions. Sans a couple of them, and I do think there's one, and it's a topic I want to get to in just a second. I'm not sure any of the solutions really have an answer for that.
No, but I think this is maybe something that has bummed me out about just the industry over the last couple of years, at least through the lens of RSA, is that it's much like saying risk can never be reduced to zero. That is true technically, but just like you can never defend against stupid, that doesn't mean use as an excuse to stop doing.
To do nothing.
To do nothing, right? And so I think that's, you know, there's been this big focus on breach detection and basically assuming that you're already going to be compromised and there's nothing you can do about this. So the best you can do is try to detect, contain, and eradicate as quickly as possible. It's important to have those capabilities, and you can never reduce risk to zero, and there's always going to be stupid. But that doesn't mean that you give up on the basic best practices that I think have totally gotten lost over the last couple of years.
They're getting lost inside all this kind of whiz bang, you know, all the, you know, where do machine learning what? Well, it's machines and they're learning, and it's like,
yeah.
And what is it that you do here? You
right.
know, how do you actually help us do anything? You know, Which gets, I think, to the first trend I want to talk about. And somebody did make it, so there was a question here. It says, I heard there weren't that many senior security folks in attendance. I don't know if I have statistics on that, but sometimes it does feel like the crowd is a more, it doesn't feel like a lot of super senior level people, but I don't know if I can really comment on that. Because it's not like I went around and asked everybody, like, are you senior? Are you senior?
I don't get the sense that you have that many like senior OPSEC type practitioners anymore. You know, it's a lot of analysts, maybe junior people new to the industry, sales.
Yeah, a lot of sales people.
Again, I think that's just as our industry's matured and there's more capital, it's just changing. There's less value to the senior practitioners that want to go there and learn, you know, the next advanced way to,
right,
you know, evade attackers. So
yeah, I sat through this top 7 attacks keynote, which had Ed Scotus and a few other kind of well-known names, and it just felt like it was the same rehashed sort of platitudes you've heard 1,000 times. And as a senior, at least I like to think of myself as a senior practitioner, it's like, yeah, I've heard this 1,000,000 times. So what? I mean, what? Don't you have anything new to say? You know, and it, not to mention the fact the whole thing just felt really rushed when they did it. So I did want to get to a couple of trends. There's a few trends I feel like we did see emerge this year. So one of the first lessons of RSA is whatever is sort of whatever wins the innovation sandbox one year becomes the hot topic next year. So last year, the winner was Phantom, and their whole product is automation and orchestration, which is great. We both of us, when we sat to the sandbox in 2016, we were both like, wow, this company is going places. They're cool. We've actually evaluated their products. They are very cool. And even though we're not here to do a Phantom sales pitch, we can say they have a cool product. Now there's other, so what happened now is this year, everybody's gotten kind of jumping on that bandwagon. And so automation and orchestration were kind of everywhere. Everybody now suddenly has an automation product. Everybody's talking about working together, getting technologies work together. I thought that was kind of an interesting point that Mark McLaughlin from Palo Alto Networks made. He basically, in no uncertain terms, said, yeah, our stuff alone doesn't work. You have to work with other people. He said a lot of other things, but that was kind of the crux of his message. And I thought that was a rather bold thing to say from a product vendor. And he's absolutely right. You can't rely on any particular one piece of technology. What do you think? Any thoughts on the automation and orchestration?
yeah, he might be the first vendor I've ever heard that said that we're not selling a silver bullet here.
Yeah. Oh my God, I heard that cliche so many times. You know, there's no silver bullets. Yeah, silver bullets. Shut up. Don't say that again. You know. So.
Yeah.
So I think the what's cool about this is that the trend of automation, the trend of orchestration is something that we predicted here at Anitian years ago. I mean, and we wrote the blog, about security analytics. That blog was published in late 2014. And at that time, it was very obvious that there was this sort of, everything was starting to kind of come together into these cohesive ecosystems.
And the pervasiveness of APIs made everything so much more consumable.
Yeah,
I'd say that's starting at the time.
Yeah, that's another big sort of trend is that, every product now suddenly has an open API that you can work with. And so you've got what a lot of these orchestration platforms really are at the core of their technology is they're an API engine. They basically just talk to lots of different APIs. But that looks interesting when you're watching it on the camera with my fingers going over. Anyways, and so they just automate and they sort of do that.
Basically an enterprise system bus, which, it's a nice 20-year-old term that probably doesn't get a lot of momentum.
You're really dating yourself with that
at RSA. But I mean, effectively, that's what we're talking about. So you talk about how everything's very derivative. I think there you go.
Yeah. That's a good trend, though. I think the trend of automation is a positive one. But I think that what's hidden underneath that, and if you really kind of start to parse, I like to think of Mark McLaughlin as somebody who, he tends to, if you parse his words, he's often saying something else underneath it. I think that's true of a lot of the speakers at RSA. They say one thing, but they kind of mean a different thing sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But if you kind of parse his language, what you really kind of get out of that is something, again, another trend that we've identified at Anitian for a long time, which is the tech really no longer matters. It really does. Something we've been saying for 15 years at Anitian, which is it really doesn't matter what tech you have. It matters how you use it. We've actually been saying that for 22 years. And so now we're hearing the industry say something very similar, which is the product you select, the next-gen firewall, the endpoint security, the SIM, is kind of irrelevant. They're all, you could sit here and argue over, well, this SIM is 1/10 of a billionth of a percent more accurate than that SIM, but it kind of doesn't matter anymore, because if you can't get all those technologies to work together and orchestrate together, then it doesn't matter that you have a Palo Alto, massive, awesome, cool, parallel processing, whatever the hell, heck it is.
No, I mean, what it comes down to is, you look at all these different bake-offs and the magazines and everything else. Yeah, you could quantify differences between classes of technology, detection rates, et cetera.
Right.
That's empirical. The fact of the matter is, in our experience, that's never the issue when there's a breach or some type of threat that has been realized. It's not that the tool that you selected within a class of products was not the right choice. It's how you're managing and how you deployed that.
How you're orchestrating.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But what's interesting, I think, is now you're hearing the vendors say this, which also, I think, gets to something that we at Anitian have been saying for a long time, which is the VAR is dead. The notion that your security program should be hinged to the products you have. And we tell customers all the time, you really got to get the technology vendors kind of out of your environment. You need to build a program that works and functions independent of the technologies you have. It shouldn't matter whether you have a Splunk or a QRadar or a Palo Alto or a Fortinet. That should be largely irrelevant. And that's what I think orchestration technologies are kind of trying to, they're kind of moving us in that direction, because that's kind of their whole point, is that they abstract the sort of orchestration to a point where it kind of doesn't matter what's underneath it. It has that universal sort of response, or playbooks they call them in Phantom's language. So
no, to be brand agnostic is important. It's funny how, in other aspects of our lives, we would never do that. You have some issue and the doctor says, you need this, and you say, no, I'm a Merck guy, so you're going to have to give me something from them instead. I mean, just
I'll only work with that. What was that scummy guy who raised the price? I only want,
or whatever.
Yeah, I only want the EpiPen from him because he's,
Yeah,
nobody says that, right? Anyways, however, let me shift us to another trend. And this is another one that I think wasn't overtly mentioned anywhere, but you kind of saw it starting to creep in. And I think this is a trend that we're going to see next year, the year after at RSA. And I think we're just seeing it in the industry, which is the devaluing of data and systems, or another way to look at this is what we call is disposable IT. I feel those two concepts are very closely related. So let me explain what I mean by that, and then we can describe why we think this is an important trend. So this notion that you can't defend against stupid, that there's a layer where there's an inevitability to getting hacked. When you kind of accept that as a known fact, you have to then say, well, what really is the answer? Well, the answer is you have to basically devalue things to the point where stealing them kind of doesn't matter anymore, right? And so that's the whole concept behind tokenizing payment card data. If you steal a tokenized payment card, it's useless. The attacker can't do anything with it. So tokenization devalues that data down to zero in that case. But then you look at other sort of technologies that are emerging. Another strategy on this is disposable IT, which is the cloud. This notion of moving your environment to Amazon or Azure is allowing you to create these environments that you can basically spin up and destroy at a moment's notice. Now that we can do infrastructure as code using things like CloudFormation and Terraform and some of these other sort of scripting languages, you can have an IT environment where you spin it up you run it for a while, and then when it comes time to update it or change it, you don't fix what's there. You simply just spin up a new instance that's got all the fixes and patches, and then you just destroy the old one and put the new one in place. You just kind of swap so basically you're replacing your IT infrastructure like all the time, constantly.
You don't even need to be doing that with the cloud. I mean, even with virtualization on-prem or in the data center, a lot of times anymore, the data store is decoupled from the server anyway.
That's right.
And so we're seeing some of our clients really leverage this successfully when you talk about maintenance and automation from a patch management and configuration management perspective of their infrastructure to make the actual servers and the systems themselves totally disposable.
Right.
You just spool up the new one with the latest packages, point it to the S3 bucket or whatever your data store is, and off you go.
Right. Which ultimately devalues each individual system. So now each individual server becomes essentially, it has no value. You just wipe it out and get rid of it at a moment's notice, which also means that any security problems, any hacks, malware, ransomware, anything that's leaked onto that system is gone. The minute you destroy it, anything that's gotten into memory, you've seen, one of the things we saw is this crypto ransomware and fileless ransomware. So this ransomware that can run exclusively in memory. Well, if you destroy the system and build a new one from a gold image, there goes your ransomware. It's gone. You don't have to worry about it. And as long as your gold images are protected, which are much easier to do, you could put them in protected stores and such like that, and make them read only. Then you essentially you eliminated that threat. So I think the key to this trend is that we didn't necessarily see a particular product that's doing this. It's more like there's an amalgam of products, which I think I'd like to get to. The Innovation Sandbox, and particularly the winner of the Innovation Sandbox, and our feelings on the second place.
Yeah, to me, that was the ray of positivity there of the whole conference, and it always is, and it was very exciting. But yeah, the winner of the Innovation Sandbox, Verify ID, to me, if they can realize the promise of their product, they are approaching the holy grail of security, which is to do away with passwords, which to me is hugely powerful and impactful.
So Verify ID's technology is what is called implicit authentication. So the idea is that it authenticates off of a lot of other criteria about a person. So some of it can be physical, fingerprints, retinas. They talked about gait. They can actually authenticate you by the way you walk. I have to do that little motion so you know what I'm talking about. Or, I don't know, I guess they could do your face or eyes or...
Yeah, I mean, instead of classic multi-factor where the biometric, if that's what we're talking about, is one of the factors, is a single biometric, here they're creating basically a digital footprint of you based on a wide range of auxiliary factors,
right.
Which makes any one of them less valuable if the inevitable happens, you break your leg, right? It's not just purely gait-based. That is a aspect of the fingerprint.
Right.
Leveraging sensors that we have in our phones and other places,
right.
As well as other aspects, location, where you're coming from. And so
right.
Conceptually, extensibility of that, I think, is large. And if we can get to the point where that could be confidently used as the single factor, if you will.
It is really a holy grail technology. I like to think of it as something that's like it has sort of a sci-fi element to it. When you watch a sci-fi movie, you don't ever see the spaceship commander walk up to the console and go, hang on, I got to log in, and hang on, I got
to change this.
hang on, just a sec. Would you tell the Klingons just wait a sec? I'll be right there. Okay. Darn it, I got the wrong thing. You never see that, which would be funny if they did it now. But the idea is, they walk up to the console and it's just, they can do whatever to the thing. And I think that's the idea behind implicit authentication, is that you could theoretically get to this point where you could walk up to a system and it would simply know that it's you. And there would be no logon. It would simply say, hello, Andrew, welcome. And that's that. However, at the Innovation Sandbox, Verify ID was the winner, which, again, I think their technology is very cool. But they had a second place, which I think both of us felt was, frankly, I feel was a more innovative technology, and frankly, the company kind of got a little robbed. I think they should have been the winner.
I think the reason Verify ID won is because if they can really get to that point where we're getting away with passwords, that has the most broad-ranging impact on the world.
Fair enough. But Unveil, which was the second place, offers a product that does homomorphic encryption, which admittedly, a lot of us probably were like, homo what? It's sort of one of those. So homomorphic encryption is the capability to encrypt data and then process and use it without ever decrypting it. So the notion that you can manipulate the data in an encrypted format and that your input and output are essentially the same, or your output is correct at that point. I felt that was more innovative in some ways and had more immediate benefits. I mean, if you think about it, if you could encrypt data and then never have to decrypt it to process it, I mean...
Yeah, their basic use case that came out of the NSA is the ability to access highly sensitive data in a fully compromised environment.
Right.
Which conceptually is huge. But again, it's a more narrow use case in the scheme of the world than passwords. Everybody who uses any type of device has a password. Not everybody is accessing highly sensitive data in a compromised environment. But technology-wise, it was awesome. I've never seen the panelists that they have of expert judges at RSA that are generally the same. There's always a crypto guy there. Forget the gentleman's name. I've never seen, the whole presentation was a total mic drop. Normally their questions, they're running out of time. Here, every question she hits it head on with a very specific technical answer, and it's like any other questions, and they're all looking around saying no. And it was like, wow.
Ellison Ann Williams was her name.
It was impressive.
And she was impressive. I think, I know that I was just sort of like, you see a lot of these presentations and a lot of the Innovation Sandbox presentations, that some of the people are a little shaky. They're not quite all there. They haven't got it all figured out. Sometimes they're just very, frothy. But I mean, she just really was, she just nailed it. I mean, the question was, the way she answered the questions, the way she, I don't know. I think all of us felt it was just like I really loved the moment where she said, and we're open to having our entire code third-party reviewed.
Yeah.
And it was like, any more questions? And it's like, no. I mean, it was just like, wow.
Yeah.
So that was that was interesting, I felt. So.
Mm-hmm.
But those are so both Unveil and Verify ID and and other technologies we're starting to see. All of these are about this notion of devaluing data to the point where its theft is no longer. It doesn't matter if it gets stolen. So then you can put it kind of anywhere. It lowers your bar of having to secure things and watch things because you kind of almost don't care if the data gets stolen now because it's just, again, it has no value. So let's move on to the next trend. Or did you have anything else you wanted to add on the devaluing?
No, I think you got it.
Yep. Okay. So let's move on to the next big trend that we heard about. Should we do GDPR or the endpoint? Which one do you think is more interesting next?
I guess I'm a bit of a compliance wonk, so I was enjoying the GDPR talks that I saw and just the conversation on it. It was I was surprised that it came up more than once at this cocktail party banter, if you will.
For those of the people that don't know what GDPR, why don't you give us the quick, what's GDPR? What does it stand for? What does it mean?
This is an EU private data privacy regulation, general data protection regulation that's going live in 2018, I believe March 2018, rolling up some previous privacy laws and expanding, most notably, the enforcement, the teeth of it. Couple potentially impactful takeaways that you have to deal with if you have any type of PII within the EU zone is that You've got to have a dedicated privacy officer to manage this program. The burden of compliance is to prove that the data has not been breached, which there was a lot of talk about as to how far do you take that, right? Is it the database wasn't compromised, or the database server was compromised but they couldn't get to the database itself? What about memory scraping, right? And so some of these examples, and it's really like, whoa, how can you prove that that wasn't compromised? Very tricky. You have to do breach notification in 72 hours, I believe, even if you haven't completed your investigation. And then the real killer is that depending on the two classes of entities that have access to this data, you can have fined up to 4% of your annual global turnover, which is effectively annual revenue in European terms with some additional caveats from what I understand. But 4% of your global annual revenue as a fine for noncompliance is potentially huge, obviously.
Yes. This has got a lot of people, I know, this has got a lot of people kind of scared.
Yeah.
What does it really mean? There's a lot of talk about this all of a sudden. It's funny because GDPR, I don't think we had heard of it, and it's actually been around for a little while. They've been working on this for...
Yeah, and it's an iteration of previous privacy regs in the EU, but the main thing is that everyone just blew them off because there's no enforcement, no teeth. Right. Suddenly it's like, whoa, it's been refactored, it's coming, and the repercussions are serious.
What I think this really means is for anybody doing business in Eurozone, it means you now have this to contend with, and it's got some real teeth behind it, and they're always going to be looking for that first big breach to kind of make an example of. I think it's the way these groups tend to think. It's and I mean I think we could look at this and say, well, is this a good or a bad thing? I'm not really sure it's either. But I do know that it's not particularly technical in the sense that it doesn't mandate you must. It's more of this, if this happens, you need to notify. It's really a lot about
it's governance, really.
Governance, yeah. It's not like you have to have a firewall or you have to have a this. I mean, you should have one, of course, but
because it's constrained, to me, where at one of the talks I went to, they even had an example of a municipality in the Netherlands where they thought they had a breach, and because they wanted to, there's very limited window to declare that you had the breach to the centralized privacy officers within the EU. They did so before they completed their investigation, only to find out that they didn't. Now, as a public entity, the reputational impact is probably less than a corporate enterprise, right? Because would you get moved from that municipality because they may have, lost your data? I guess that might have happened, but they're maybe more inclined to err on the side of caution. In the private sector, I know, regulation aside, any entities that have suspected there might be a breach are extremely reticent to notify anybody about this until they are 110% sure. Right. And frankly, on top of that, once they've also analyzed the repercussions of not notifying in the first place, not to be too cynical about the whole thing. And so here, when you're facing massive fines for noncompliance, if you don't notify in this very small window before you're not even sure, I see that have some real potential to cause some turmoil.
I mean, my first thought on that would really be is this is something that's going to have to accelerate the IR process. I mean, you're going to have to, if there's an incident, you're going to have to basically conduct an investigation very quickly and come to some conclusion. You can't wait 6 weeks now to kind of wait to figure out what to do and call 36 different vendors. You've got to get on this right away.
Yeah, and we had some talk offline at one of the sessions that I was at there, because it's written in this kind of governance, legalese kind of weasel language. There's a potential interpretation by the regulatory authorities, which no one is particularly fond of having conversations with them, of course, that the interpretation is 72 hours within the detection of the event that might then ultimately be determined to be a breach. So we're not saying you have some alerts come off, you say, okay, we've got an event, is this an incident? It might be an incident, let's now investigate the incident to determine if it's a breach, and that whole life cycle, and then once you make that call, you've got 72 hours. There could be an interpretation that says, you got that IPS alert, You got 72 hours to let the world know, even if you haven't even figured out what's going on.
Yeah.
That seems awfully strict, but
Yeah.
that's an argument that can be made there, the way the language is written. So
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, GDPR, just General Data Protection Regulation. Nice name, too. Nice and generic.
Yeah.
This doesn't have some fun little sort of name to it.
I keep wanting to conflate it with like privacy rule, like with HIPAA or something in my mind when I say the acronym. So
Right. So another trend, I was going to move along from that because I don't want GDPR to become the the thing that puts everybody to sleep. Sorry, being a compliance wonk. I'd say another big trend that I think a lot of us have seen. I don't think is new, is this disappearance of the perimeter and the new focus on the endpoint. And I got to say, it's literally to the point where, there really is no such thing as a perimeter anymore. I don't even know why people are, perimeter technologies, next-gen firewalls and whatnot, are becoming rapidly useless to the point of I'm not saying don't have them. It's just, why would you continue to invest in these technologies?
the concept of thinking of this bubble around your entire infrastructure, that is totally gone.
Yeah.
You're going to have microsegments and zones fractured all throughout, not only the enterprise, on-prem, data centers, the cloud. Of course, you're going to have segmentation and boundaries around each of those. So it's not to say that we're saying everything should be a big, giant, flat, routed internet here.
Yeah.
Of course. But the fact is, people still talk and think about the old M&M model of the hard outer shell around your network. And
a lot of the products, I think, talk that way. They're still talking in terms of, as long as you have us at your perimeter, you're protected. Well, first off, the majority of these next-gen firewalls, if you're not doing SSL inspection, you're missing over 50% of the traffic. You're totally not seeing anything. If you're not in the middle of that SSL session, the majority of the ransomware and malware and botnet traffic nowadays is encrypted. And so you're just not going to see it, and you're going to have no insight into it. And at that point, it's just strictly, is this device talking to somebody on the internet that we know to be a malware site? But even that's tricky to get.
Especially with all the software as a service cloud offerings that are so heavily utilized by organizations now for key, very mission critical business operations, your CRMs, et cetera. So
right. So what we've seen is really this new shift over to endpoint solutions. And there was our first drama of RSA actually happened at the very beginning of the show. So on Monday afternoon, a court in Maryland, I believe, issued a dismissal, actually, of a case against NSS Labs. So NSS Labs on Tuesday morning released a endpoint security test they did. So NSS Labs is an independent testing agency. They test products and provide results on the performance and the capabilities of those products. And on Tuesday morning, they released a report. Well, sometime on Monday, CrowdStrike tried to get an injunction against that report, saying that it was unfair and it was wrong, and basically pulling your classic kind of crybaby move. We don't like what you're going to say about us, so we're going to try and sue you. And a court in Maryland, I don't know if it was a circuit court or a federal court or exactly what court it was, basically said, sorry, no way. NSS Labs can release their report, and they did. And the long and short of it is CrowdStrike didn't fare particularly well. The end result was they were not very effective as a product, which was funny because if you went by the CrowdStrike booth, you sure as heck wouldn't know that. It was they had what's his name, Kurtz there in the booth, and he's signing his book, and it's like, hey, they certainly weren't taking it lying down. So
I don't know. Anytime it was brought up to me in conversation, certainly wasn't favorable.
Yeah, the long and short of it is CrowdStrike's been kind of a darling in the industry One of the first true like managed detection and response, MDR, which is a somewhat emergent new class of services. We actually offer it at Anitian as well. That's what our Sherlock service is, an MDR. But it's an emergent class of services where you have, sort of hunting, threat hunting going on. And CrowdStrike provides a product that they actually make to put on the endpoint. And they compete with the likes of Cylance and SentinelOne, and of course the the Symantec's and McAfee's of the world, and a bunch of other sort of products in that. But the surprise is that Cylance and SentinelOne performed quite well, apparently, and sort of reaffirm that some of these endpoint products have some value to them.
Yeah. Good to see the hometown boys there, Cylance, right down the street.
That's right. Cylance has a big office here in Portland. I don't know if we can call them hometown. That's a little much.
I'm always traveling with them. Every time I fly to RSA, it seems like
you run into the Cylance guy. We like their products. We're not here to sell Cylance. Don't call us to buy it because we're not a bar. But it is a good product, and it was, they've been kind of on a tear. But the trend, I think, that's interesting here, and I do think that the cloud and moving to the cloud is also influencing this, is that there is no perimeter, and that you really have to do everything now back at the end point, which makes your life a lot harder because it's more difficult to manage endpoints. I don't think I need to tell an OPSEC guy or anybody that. We all know that.
Sure. But, we were talking earlier about the trends and all the followers, and I think Cylance is a good example when we talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now, suddenly everybody does that no matter what it is, because there is success and innovation in that area, Cylance being a classic example of this. Mm-hmm. But now suddenly everybody is just tacking that on their marketing without any type of substantiation of that.
And the question has always become are these new, so Cylance's thing is they have this mathematical statistical engine thing here, excuse me, that monitors the system and does this statistical computation that, if these certain events happen in this sequence, then statistically you're, highly likely to be compromised. And then it looks at the files and does some comparison. So the concept is solid, and then there's some sort of this sort of machine learning baked into that. I'm not doing Cylance justice here, other than to say I think it's encouraging to see that some of the hype is producing results, and some of these technologies actually do provide some value to them.
Yeah, behavior-based threat detection is obviously been something that we've been working on forever, ever since the first AV agents started touting heuristics, when it really was basically just a iteration of signatures. So it's promising.
It is promising. So I see we had a question, how can I find out information about devaluing your infrastructure? It's devaluing the data, not necessarily the entire infrastructure, but point taken, by restoring each time you perform patches. This is a topic that we're at Anitian, we are working a lot on. We're writing a lot about, blogging on it. We actually have a presentation we do called Compliance in the Cloud that we are doing at ISSA. What am I doing that? ISACA. That's the national conference, though, right? In Las Vegas. I'm looking at Megan over here off screen. Las Vegas in May. Compliance in the Cloud. So come to the ISACA conference. We'll talk about that. But if it is something you're interested in, this is something we do a lot of advising of our clients on. There you have it. That was the sales pitch for that. Did I answer that?
And if you just want to do some homework, I would lump this under the general concept of infrastructure as code. You talked about that before. Where the key components there are the automation of the deployment and the configuration management platform to ensure consistency. And so just spooling up.
You described it as this kind of you have to automate the deployment, which is one piece, and that's the put everything out there, and then you have to automate the configuration, which is often another piece.
But ideally they happen in tandem, right?
Yeah, exactly. They kind of happen simultaneously.
Right. So you don't patch the server, you just deploy a new one, based off your recipes or whatever your configuration management system is using, roll it out, point the data store to it, change your DNS or whatever it is, and off you go.
Yeah, off you go.
And obviously when you have a load balance pool anyway, it can be happened seamlessly.
Right. So one last trend we want to talk about before we go. One thing I did want to comment on though is so the keynote this year, the main keynote, so the big keynote. In the past it's always been RSA trots out their CEO, which for eons was Art Cavellio, and he'd come out and he'd dance, and there'd always be music, and it's like and he'd tell us he's not going to sell fear, and then he'd spend 20 minutes scaring us. We're failing. And so every year we kind of got, it's like, oh, here's Art, blah, blah, blah. And every year it feels like we kind of got a new sort of, RSA sales pitch. And then, of course, they changed over the CTO or CEO to Amit Yoren, which gave he did these speech for 2 years, and each year was kind of increasingly more subversive.
Well, you talk about the subtext of what they're actually saying. That guy had it in spades.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, the second year that he did it, I remember I wrote about it, and I was like, man, he was so obvious. He's like, Dell, get off my back, okay? Well, Dell won, and nothing was more obvious this year than the keynote where Dell very much asserted their authority over RSA this year. So the keynote was given by, so RSA doesn't have a CEO anymore. Amit left to go work for Tenable, which is good. It's a good place for him to be. Tenable's a great company. So Amit left, and so we got the CTO, which was Zulfikar Ramzan. Oh, I knew I was going to kill his name. That's pretty good, though. Smart guy, and frankly gave a very good keynote. He talked about chaos, which I thought also was an interesting topic. He talked about the nature of chaos having being a source of ingenuity and capability, which I thought was interesting because it had kind of that sort of chaos theory, early 90s feel.
It wasn't quite Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, but right. It was fair.
It was funny because when I was in college in the early 90s, chaos theory was really hot, and everything was about chaos theory. And I wrote a paper in college about chaos theory, and then to hear this guy get up on, and hear decades later talk about chaos, I was like, whoa, okay,
you're right back on that.
We're right back to chaos
in the dorm room there.
Yeah, exactly. But he's talking about chaos. But the thing that was interesting is we're not talking about chaos like, planets and suns and stars like, forming together over millennia to create, solar systems. This is a very different kind of chaos. And I don't think he realized that he was saying is we're really now to a point where we're talking about this kind of weaponized chaos, this notion of creating destabilization for the sole purpose of getting people to do something or getting people to buy something. And I would say RSA, if there's one thing it did in a big way this year, was at every turn it was trying to destabilize you and get you, focused off on something else and missing, away from the goal, away from the big picture issue of you still need to patch servers, you still need to do these basic stuff.
It's interesting. This was actually just substantiated. There's been a lot of murmur about this within our industry and, the armchair political scientists out there. But some general or some big guy in Russia actually just talked about this on the record. Their information cyber warfare capabilities and maturation of that, and their primary goal is disinformation, to basically discredit everything. So it's not about getting you to believe us, it's about getting you to believe nothing.
Right. And I think what's happening here, and I think this is something we all need to pay attention to, because what these vendors are doing, intentionally or otherwise, is they're kind of getting us to keep questioning ourselves, so that then they can rush into that fold and say, but I've got a silver bullet. Boy, have I got a solution for you. Are you feeling scared and not sure what's going to happen? My next generation globally dominant,
Can you prove that you don't have drones spying on you right now?
How do you know you don't have tigers? So that's an interesting thing. But then to put that in context, right? So you've got this intelligent, scientifically minded guy on stage giving what is a competent keynote. I wouldn't call it inspirational, but it was competent. He was good. And then out trots Michael Dell. And Michael Dell is, hi, everybody. I like security. That security thing's going places, everybody. So buy more security and do security. And
you can trust me. I'm wearing the red Chucks.
Right. And I'm wearing the shoes. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, it was so obvious. I mean, you couldn't have painted a propaganda poster better than this. I mean, the only thing Michael Dell could have done that would have been even more obvious is to go, and all of you, I want to be really clear. I'm in charge here, and you're going to do what I say moving forward. I mean, it was a very firm sort of display of power on his part.
To me, that really almost puts a fork in the full evolution of RSA from being this meeting of the minds to move the industry forward to just a full-blown revenue generator for Dell, giant circus of sales and VC and debauchery.
Which is funny because you think about their whole new thing is business-driven security, and it's like, well, what was it before? I mean, suddenly you care about businesses now. Well, what were you last year? Last year it was something else. And I joked, I said, yeah, their new business-driven model is to drive cash into Michael Dell's pocket. It's like, I don't care if Michael Dell makes a little more money,
He's driving one business.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the funny thing is that from my industry analyst point of view, we have been hearing rumors about their, RSA's sell. They've been trying to sell off RSA forever, and nobody apparently wants to buy them. They've never been able to sell. There's been so many rumors. I mean, there have been rumors of RSA getting sold for, I think we're going into 10 years now, and it never happened. So clearly, there's just something not right there. And I can't say I have a lot of faith in RSA, the company. But then again, I can't say I have a lot of faith in RSA, the show, at this point either.
Sad but true.
Sad but true. One last point, though, positivity. We're getting toward the end of our time. We did want to mention one last trend that I think of all the trends is, in our opinion, the best of them all and the most positive trend, which is, and again, wasn't necessarily any one specific thing, but you definitely felt it everywhere, which is just the cloud, the move to the cloud. So I heard an interesting statistic at AGC this year. So AGC, America's Growth Capital, is the investor conference that happens concurrently with RSA. I go to that every year to hang out with the venture capitalists and try to make myself feel more important. Doesn't always work. But I heard an interesting statistic, and it was that while something on the order of 99% of companies and organizations have a presence in the cloud of some form, only 17% of workloads, which is somewhat of a generic definition, but workloads is in the cloud, meaning 17% of what all these companies do has been moved into the cloud. So the notion there was that there's still a lot of runway, that there's a lot of growth in the cloud to come. And
everybody's got exposure to it, but they're only dipping the toe in.
Yeah, they've only dipped their toe in. And from a security perspective, this is probably an area where we at Anitian differ from some of our peers, is we believe, and you can correct my belief if you disagree with me, but I don't think you do.
Let's keep it a we.
Let's keep it a we. We believe that moving things into the cloud is ultimately better for security. That security in the cloud is, I don't know if I want to say easier, but you're starting from a stronger base is the way I think.
There's greater potential because there's less ultimate responsibility. It doesn't mean your responsibility is nil. I see this all the time with the compliance work that I do with people in the cloud, where they take that idea too far and think they could just toss anything up there and there's no worries.
Work blind.
Yeah, right. Obviously not the case, but the fact is you're not starting from scratch. It's no different than the idea of if you host at a reputable data center, that's probably easier than building one from scratch by starting with the backhoe in a field in your campus. So
I think the trend we're seeing is that there's a lot of, when you move things into the cloud, the flexibility, the ability to create and destroy so quickly allows you to secure things quicker, more effectively, more efficiently. It allows you to, again, like we talk about with disposable IT, there's a lot of benefits you can get when you move into an AWS or Azure or these types of environments that you just can't get on site, on-prem. Or even if you're moving pieces of your infrastructure up there. It's part of the reason why we've built our managed security platform on AWS, because our ability to automate and just be able to deploy like that is a huge benefit.
And it's very platform specific and service specific within said platform, but there are certain cases undeniably where they are providing a security control mechanism that was extremely cumbersome to implement as recently as a year or two ago. Something that comes to mind that I see all the time with the compliance work I do is key management using RDS in AWS, right? You have your own database and you're trying to implement key rotation and management on your own. It's cumbersome. RDS, it's a checkbox.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
they've taken a complex thing and they've kind of smoothed out those edges. What I will say, there's a trend lurking behind the scenes here, though, and it's something I talk about with a lot of the analysts and investors that I work with on a advisory basis. There is a coming reckoning for all of these vendors, all of these hardware vendors, because as more and more goes into the cloud, and they haven't been hurt by this quite as much as I think I would have expected at this point, but as more and more moves into the cloud, the need for these giant boxes, rack-mounted 5U, Palo Altos and Fortinets and Ciscos and whatever is, I mean, there's absolutely no reason to be buying these because you can put it all in the cloud. And you can size that box to whatever you need. So the companies that have cloud-based solutions are significantly better suited for those that have kind of ignored it. And some vendors have gone that direction more than others. I think of somebody like Trend Micro as a good example of a company that their on-prem products are, they've kind of, but their cloud products are pretty innovative. Fortinet's another good example of a company that really embraced cloud deployment early on. So those companies that are going that route are better suited for the long term versus the ones that just keep saying, oh, no, we're just going to keep deploying gear, into these data centers.
Especially those that are built on some type of underlying intelligence and R&D platform that is difficult for the big cloud providers to simply replicate.
Yeah.
Right? Some of these really generic technologies, you see the Amazons of the world, they're just saying, no problem, we can roll our own ourselves. Toss it out as a service.
WAF.
Boom. Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Web Application Firewall. So AWS, for example, now has a WAF service they offer, which means, I mean, that's pretty much the death nail for the WAF industry because why would you go out and spend all this money on a WAF when you can put everything in AWS and you basically got it? Now, is their WAF better than Imperva? Well, that's, at the end of the day, does it really matter? As long as it does what you need it to do, it kind of doesn't matter. So. Well, on that positive note, are we going to go again next year?
Do we have to? We will go. It's always great to see familiar faces throughout the industry. And the one thing that doesn't change is the opportunity to catch up with colleagues. And
what's funny is I think each year I spend more and more time just with customers and friends and people I know and less time actually at the show,
right. Which
makes me wonder, why do I even get a pass anymore? I might as well just,
Yeah.
I do like going to AGC because that's a very different crowd. But
the number of sessions I have to wade through every year to get some nugget of information seems to be growing exponentially. And so.
Yeah. We'll go next year for no other reason than it gives me a chance to blog and write things based on the Road Warrior, which was, if you saw was that my Thursday blog or my Wednesday blog? It was the Thursday blog. It was the one I used the Road Warrior as the first. So of course I had Idiocracy on the first day, right?
Can't defend against stupid.
Can't defend against shirt. At least we have this not shirt guy, right? Well, with that note, I'm gonna close this up. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. We don't. This is recorded, so we will be putting a recording of this on the website. So if you want to pass it around to your friends, your enemies, if you want to send it to the guys at Cylance to make them feel better, just don't send it to the CrowdStrike guys because I don't think they're going to be sending us a Christmas card. Actually, I don't think they're going to be sending anybody a Christmas card this year. But please pass it around. And as always, if you have any other questions or concerns or worries or anything, please feel free to always reach out to us here at Anitian. Thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. We hope this was educational. And if it wasn't, I'm sorry. We'll do better next time, we promise. But on that note, Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for facilitating.
Yeah.
If you are going to be at RSA next year, in seriousness, we'll be there. Look for us.
Yes, and come to our Jamber event because you get to see me drink too much, which if there's no other reason to go to RSA, there's a good reason.
Always fun.
Always fun. All right, everybody, take care and have a great day.